you all. It is such a privilege and an honor to be with you today. And Jean and your team, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It's just so awesome seeing everything, hearing all the talks that have taken place this morning. When I was thinking about what to talk about, that brings the whole issue around social integrity, I ended up writing a little quote which I just want to share with you before I start. And that quote was, "The social injustice in society will not be addressed until our hearts are broken by it. It will require us to challenge the status quo. Firstly, of our unconcerned hearts and our incorrect mindsets that convince us that there is nothing that we can do about systemic poverty, racism, corruption, etc., that we see all around us. Only when our hearts are broken and our minds transformed will we be able to sustainably deal with social injustice. The foundation of social integrity and social justice is the greatest commandment, loving the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength, and loving your neighbor as you love yourself." So what I really want to try and do is to touch on some aspects of what I've just said there in that quote through this presentation here. So I've called it "Social Integrity Starts in My Own Heart." And what I want to go through in these next 30 minutes is a little bit of a story. So what happens when I've fallen into that deep, dark hole where integrity is lost? Is there a way out of that? And is there perhaps a reason why we fall in that deep, dark hole? And can God turn around what the enemy meant for evil for some good? And could perhaps even God use that, what is seemingly a disaster, for his own purposes, where he actually releases us into his vision for us and into the execution plan for that vision? I really appreciated what Brant said, that it's not just about the plan, but it's about the execution of the plan. It's not just about having this great idea that we never do anything with. So let's talk a little bit about social integrity. I think we've probably covered a lot about what integrity is all about. It's about being whole and undivided. It's being who you truly say you are. It's being the real you. So integrity has everything to do, again, with what Jean spoke about this morning, which is about identity. Who am I really? Am I the same when I'm at home? Am I the same when I'm in the office? Am I the same when I'm in the prayer meeting? Because if I'm not the same in all of those environments, it means somewhere along the line, I'm putting on masks to get by. That is the lack of integrity. Am I behaving in the way that is lined up with what I say to be my core values? If I believe that the Bible is the core source of truth, is my behavior in alignment with it? Because if it's not in alignment with it, then I've got an integrity issue. And I truly believe that one of the things that non-believers battle with us believers, is that they see an integrity gap within us. Because we talk about a lot of things that we say are in the Bible, but we actually don't really do them. So let's also define what we're talking about when we talk about social. Social has got to do with how we interact, how we live as human beings. It's about how we organize ourselves. There's rank and status in society, but it's essentially about how we as humans live. And a huge part of how we humans live is about, are we able to love our neighbor as we love ourselves? And could they be a situation that indeed we do love our neighbor as we love ourselves? Is there a point that maybe we actually don't love ourselves? And therefore, because we don't love ourselves, we love our neighbor in exactly the same way that we love ourselves. So that's part of what I want us to explore as we go through this. So some of the things I want to touch on when we are talking about social integrity, we cannot possibly talk about social integrity without addressing some of the systemic and structural issues that we have in society. Systemic and structural poverty, inequality, racism at a personal level, at an institutional level, systemic and structural discrimination. All of those things are contrary to the greatest commandment of loving the Lord, loving my neighbor as I love myself. For as long as we are happy and content and unbothered by some of these social injustices, we can't possibly be the guys who are carrying the light that says we are here to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, and we are here to fulfill the greatest commandment. So for me, let me just share a little bit of a story in terms of how this journey started for me, and towards the end, I'll share a little bit about where we are right now and how this has developed over time. For me, in 2010 was an absolute watershed year for me, because that's the year I think God started shaking me a little bit and saying, listen, what you've been involved in up to now is what I call religion. I call that the tick box stuff that you've been doing, where you go to all the prayer meetings, you go to all the services, and you tick the box off. But you know what? That's not really what I'm looking for. What I'm really looking for and what I'm desiring from you is a true relationship, where you interact with me and everyone else, not out of obligation, not out of a tick box mentality, but just because we are in a relationship. You are my son, I'm your father, and let's just relate as two people who are in an intimate relationship. That was the start of this. So the start of this journey for me was God challenging me with 4 specific questions. The first question was, so why do you live in a country that is supposedly Christian majority and yet you don't see Christian culture prevailing? And God said to me, listen, understand this. Whoever is a majority in any given group of people, the culture will prevail. So why is it that we claim that we are a Christian nation, or there are Christian nations around, but yet our culture is not what prevails? Why is there such an opposite correlation between a nation where today we literally pick up the paper and all we see is corruption, bad leadership, corruption, and yet we say we're 85% Christian? The second question was, so why do you live in a continent that I've blessed with such an abundance of resource, and you continue to be the begging bowl of the world? That again just didn't make sense. I've given you everything that you need as a continent. Why are you going around begging everybody else? The third question was, so Africa has the greatest growth in evangelism of all the continents right now. Why is it that we're not seeing the social economic impact that we should see when there is such a prevalence of the truth of the gospel in societies? The fourth one was really, for me now, the one I wrestled with in a big way. Because I then said to God, God, I need you to tell me something. As somebody who has this black skin color, when I switch on my TV and I see systemic poverty, I see systemic disease, I see everything that is wrong with the world socially and economically, I see a black face on TV. And Lord, are we cursed as black people? I need to understand this, because if you're saying to me, you want a loving father relationship with me, how can I possibly enter into this relationship with you if I think that you treat other races differently to the way that you treat us as black people? Because why is the situation this way for us as black people? And I said, Lord, if I don't have the answer to this, this relationship thing I'm not too sure about. But anyway, the good news about this is, over time, I've now come to understand the answers behind that, and that God absolutely loves everyone exactly the same. So that's good news. Anyway, so as I pondered with all of these things, the Lord gave me an opportunity to travel to the US, and I attended a seminar called a Transformational Leadership Seminar. And at this seminar, I met a gentleman who's now become my spiritual father. He's my mentor. I call him my white American father. And after we had gone through some things in this training, which completely blew me away, he then said to me, the one evening before I left the States, he said to me, Patrick, will you be willing to think about tonight, what are all the deepest, darkest secrets? Things that have happened in your life that you've never been able to share with anyone at all. Will you think about those things and let me know in the morning if you're prepared to talk about them and what God reveals to you? So that night, with much tears, much anguish, this is what I wrote, and this is what I shared with him the next morning. Here lies Patrick Kuwana, who today submits himself to completely die to fear, guilt, shame by confessing to you. I've had major sexual immorality issues for many of my adult years until God's grace and mercy rested upon me. I consulted many palm readers and fortune tellers and opened up my life to the occult. Prior to getting married, I indulged in premarital sex, and one of these indulgences resulted in a pregnancy that I was responsible for and participated in the abortion thereof, and thus this made me into a murderer. In 1996, I got married to my wife Maud, and we have been blessed with two precious sons, Tino, who is 10 at the time, Tadiwa Nashe, who is 7 at the time. At the time of our marriage, I was a corporate high flyer, and my monetary success was more important to me than God and my wife. Within a couple of years into the marriage, I started having extramarital affairs, several over a period of about 7 years. A couple of these encounters involved unprotected sex, and at one point, I was even worried that I might have contracted the HIV/AIDS virus. Thank goodness, by the grace of God, I did not, as I could easily have murdered my own wife and children. During this period, I got exposed and addicted to strip clubs and developed the urge to go several times a week. And I would even go there by myself just to have a drink. The low point in my life is that I even tried what it felt like to pay for sex and even fell into prostitution. One day, I remember sitting at a strip club with a friend, discussing our new business idea, how to set up a teasers franchise in Soweto that would be the first black franchise of teasers, and how we would become millionaires within the year. I also succumbed to pornography and that addiction. During this whole time, at one point, I even had the audacity to raise my hand and slap Maud, my wife, when she confronted me about my whereabouts and my behavior. She endured my abuse, my drunkenness, my disrespect, and my selfishness. Even though I was earning a top salary, I squandered most of our family money fueling my lifestyle. I even had the audacity a few times to spend money on gifts for my adulterous partners instead of focusing on the needs of my wife and my family. Today, I'm still dealing with the debt trap that I dug for myself and my family, and I've come to realize that I was also a thief because I've been unfaithful with the assets in the business that the partners in the business have given me responsibility for. I've not dealt honestly, and therefore I've stolen from business partners. Today, my wife does not know the majority of this, and I ask you to pray with me that God will reveal how He wants me to deal with this, and that Maud will have the grace to be able to forgive me, and that ultimately I will fear God more than anything else and be obedient to whatever He says I need to do. So that was the letter that I read to Ford, my mentor, in May of 2011. After a month of prayer and fasting, on the 1st of June 2011, I sat with my wife in my office and I read her that letter. And I asked her for forgiveness. And I'll never forget the brief sentence, which was her response. And her response was, "This is really hard for me, but I choose to forgive you. This is really hard for me, but I choose to forgive you." From that moment onwards, we have seen the amazing grace of God upon our marriage, upon our children. Because coming from a place where I was the last person who could stand on the stage to talk about integrity. But I came to realize that even when we've fallen so deep, the love of Jesus Christ and the finished work of the blood of Jesus, there's absolutely nothing impossible that it can't cover. And God recovered that. 6 months later, we went to the shareholders of the business that I was involved in, and we said to them, "We have done wrong, and we would like to invoke restitution. And we believe the restitution that we need to invoke is, here is our shareholders' agreements." And we said to them, "We are signing away our shares to all the other partners in the business as a sign of restitution because we've done wrong." By the middle of 2012, we had no business, we had no income. From that period onwards, we then went through a journey where we lost our house, we lost cars, we lost everything of material possession that we could possibly have as a family, except the clothes on our back and the fact that somehow, miraculously, our children could still go to school. But in all of that, there are a number of lessons. That is my family, by the way. God has blessed me with an amazing wife. And as she said what she said to me, all I could see was Jesus in my wife's eyes. And I thought, isn't that exactly what Jesus did on the cross, where he said, "Listen, I just forgive you. Irrespective of what you have done, I forgive you." I saw Jesus in my wife that day, and God has blessed me with the most amazing family. So what are some of the lessons, very quickly, that I've learned? I've learned that God's grace is amazing. And even if we have failed in the area of integrity, in whichever place we've failed in, please don't think your failure is higher than what the blood of Jesus Christ has done. Bring whatever you think is your greatest failure to God and watch and see what he will do with it. I've also learned that in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were naked, and they were not shameful of their nakedness. It was only when sin came in that they felt shame. And through this process, one of the things that God taught us was, guys, when you truly appropriate the blood of Jesus, all guilt and shame falls away. I want you to become naked in our relationship again, where there's nothing that you hide away from me, and you know what? There's actually nothing that you hide away from man. Because when you're naked, without the guilt, without the shame, I clothe you with Christ. I clothe you with Christ. The only clothes that we need to wear are Christ. Because you see, whatever clothes you're wearing is what you will fight for the most. If your highest clothes that you're wearing is your skin color, you will fight for your skin color. If your highest level of identity is in your language, you will fight for your language. But if your highest form of identity is being clothed in Christ, all of those other things become non-issues. Because it's the clothing of Christ that drives us into unity to be able to overcome what we need to overcome. I also understood this greatest equation: forgiveness plus healing equals wholeness. Again, God says in his word, ask me for forgiveness, I'll forgive you. But he also says in James 5:16, confess your sins to each other. Pray for each other so you can get healing. And when we get the forgiveness of God and the healing that comes from us socially coming right and doing the right things together, what is released is wholeness, and we can go out and do what God calls us to do from a position of wholeness. So again, the more I surrender to the wholeness process, the more that I find that I'm less offended by people. The less I judge them. Because I understand that they could be broken just as I was broken. But through God's grace, He healed my brokenness, so who am I to judge them? Who am I to be offended? But how can I see the brokenness that maybe they are carrying in their lives, and how can I be a messenger of hope for that? Another thing that we learned is that if we really want to see kingdom culture, national transformation happen in society, if we really want to impact the social fabric of society, it has to start with self. Again, Brant talked about self-leadership this morning. We can't lead anything before we've decided to evaluate ourselves and lead ourselves. It's about me being honest. It's about my integrity with God foremost. Am I walking in integrity with God? Because once I walk in integrity with God, God then says, well, the very next place, before you go too far to the city, what are you doing in your own home? Is there integrity in your own marriage? Clean that up, because I can't give you the authority or the anointing to go into the city if you can't do it in your own home. What's happening within your family? What's happening with your relationship with other people? Are you seeing all people, irrespective of color, that they are created in the image of God? And if you do see them as being created in the image of God, do you see God in other people? Do you see me, Jesus, dwelling in other people? Because when we're able to do that, then we can really begin to talk about the social ills from a position of not being offended. Where we no longer think this is a racist issue. Where we no longer think that this is an ethnic language issue, but we're saying, how do we deal with the brokenness that's causing this systemic poverty, this systemic racism, this systemic inequality? How do we deal with it from a place of being whole? From there, we can talk about organizations, we can talk about the city, we can talk about nations. Because God will only give us the authority to deal with the next level based on the level that we have dealt with. If I have not dealt with my own family, I have no business coming into Pretoria and claiming to be a transformation agent in the city of Pretoria. I need to go back to my home and sort out my home. See, personal integrity is really the starting point. It releases us into God's divine vision, it connects us to Jesus the vine, and it gives us access to the power of the Holy Spirit. Talking about social justice, social integrity. Part of this journey that the Lord took us through was a journey where He now revealed to myself and Maud and us as a family exactly what the vision is, His divine purpose for us. And that divine purpose is covered in that picture that you see. If you come and visit me at our home, the first thing that you will see as you walk into our house is that painting. The last thing that you will see is that painting, because that's what gets us up in the morning. That's what gets us to do everything we do. And that picture is a picture of Africa. The fact that God has blessed Africa with such an abundance of resource. But despite everything that has happened on this African continent, that picture of this young boy here is a young boy that is trying to bring all the races. You'll see there's white features, black features, Indian features in the coloring of that boy. Because if we are to see what God wants to do on this continent, we will have to come into unity across racial groups, across ethnic groups, across tribes. There's no other way of doing it. It's a prerequisite. So we will have to bring what we are carrying in our hands before the Lord, and we will need to surrender before the Lord and give Him what we have. I was talking in Zimbabwe to a farming group in Zimbabwe, and I was saying to them, isn't it amazing that for so long as Africans, we fought against colonialism. And you see, the part that we got wrong is that even as black Africans, we fought for the land. But what we didn't quite understand is that the land is actually not ours. It's God. And the mistake that the colonialist made is that they thought the land was theirs. But the land is not theirs. It's actually God. So the day that we, black and white, realize that the land is neither ours, but it's God, and we give God back the land so that he can do what he wants to do with it, is the day that we will see South Africa and Africa begin to make progress. The land is not ours. It's not black land, it's not white land, it's God's land. We are just stewards over the land. We need to stop fighting about land and give it all back to the owner. So we wake up, and these are some of the things that we focus on doing in the work that we do. You see, the Bible talks about the mountain of the Lord. But the Bible also talks about high places. And there are all sorts of high places over Africa. Mammon, corruption, racism, fatherlessness, worthlessness, poverty. These are all strongholds that sit over this continent of Africa that lead to a lot of the social injustices that we have. Part of social integrity is breaking these strongholds, personally in our own minds, but societally. But you see, we can't do it from the low place. And often what we are trying to do is we're trying to figure out man-made strategies and man-made solutions to try to address these high places that are stopping us from moving forward as a nation and as a continent. But the Bible also says, where God says, listen, if there's one lesson I learned through this testimony that I've shared with you, is where God says, listen, there are three critical components: confession, repentance, and forgiveness. When those things are invoked, there's a certain power that God accelerates us forward. And if we read in Psalm 15, Psalm 24, it talks about who may climb up the mountain of the Lord, who may dwell in his holy place, and then it gives characteristics of integrity. It says, he who has clean hands, he who has a pure heart, he who has never given his soul unto idols, he who will always speak the truth and never speak falseness. And Psalm 24 gives another bunch, Psalm 15 gives another bunch of integrity characteristics that God says, if you do this, this is the character of the guy or woman who will sit with me in my high place. There's no other way of doing it. I can stand up here all day and say, I'm in the presence of the Lord, but God says, these are the conditions for you being on my mountain. And when we discovered this, we then began to understand that's a place where now the anointing, the power, the authority of God, he now gives us the divine strategies and the solutions to deal with the high places. It's impossible to deal with the high places from a low place when we've not gone up the mount of the Lord. And as somebody who absolutely is bought into the 7 mountain strategy of impacting society, I believe there's another component that we need to add to our 7 mountain strategy. We need to add the 8th mountain. Because you see, when we climb up the mountain of the Lord, we no longer need to climb up 7 mountains. We descend upon the 7 mountains in the power of God. See, when we look at Africa, we see a lot of these things: anger, fear, shame, and it carries on. But what was God's original plan for this continent? A continent that has an abundance of blessing, resources, people. But you see, the enemy knew, so what did he come to do? He came to steal, to kill, to destroy. One of the answers to the question about why Africa that that God gave me, which gave me so much encouragement, was Matthew 25, where he said, listen, do you understand in the parable of the talents that I gave each person their talents, the 5, the 3, the 1, or the 10, the 5, the 1, whichever version it is. I gave them their talents based on their abilities. And God then said, listen, understand that I've blessed Africa with such an abundance of natural resource, more than any other continent in the world. I have given the African person more ability to manage those resources than I've given anyone else. And therefore, the number one thing that the enemy has done on this continent is to try to kill the ability of and the identity of the African. And how has he done that? By bringing in systems of social injustice that make us think that it's about the color of our skin. Colonialism, apartheid, slavery, those were systems that have extracted the self-worth and value of most indigenous African people. And through that, it builds a stronghold of mindsets where our minds need to be transformed. And therefore, we sit in a continent that has been called the dark continent that is seemingly in ruins. But you see, there's another plan here, because there's a prophecy that says, arise and shine. We need to rebuild. Jesus died on the cross for this continent. We need to get back to God's original plan. And that's really part of the work that we do as a business. What we do, in a nutshell, is we raise dead organizations. We heal sick organizations. And we cast demons out of organizations. That is what we do as a business. And part of doing that is 3 phases. We talk about DNA restoration, transforming people's minds, getting them back to the original blueprint of God, getting their thinking back online, identity, ability, breaking out of generational thinking that is incorrect. Because when we do that, we can then talk about the next level is the ministry of reconciliation. How do we then bring people who have transformed minds to now realize that they need to work together in trust, in unity, so that they can bring all the gifts and the talents that God has given them together so that we can rebuild socio-economic platforms and co-create new things. And I believe that is where God is wanting business to be, where we can be re-looking the ways we do business. We can be re-looking the ways that we actually even look at the economy, where we can become a blessing so that we deal with the social injustice that we have. And as I finish off, I just want to throw this one onto the table. The biggest challenge that we face as a country is systemic and structured racism. And you see, we who call ourselves to be believers in Jesus Christ, we have been given the ministry of reconciliation. If we cannot do it, nobody else is going to do it. But it will take us to take off my black skin and lay it down on the altar, take away my Shona language, lay it down on the altar, and make the decision to be clothed with Christ so that we can demonstrate what it means to be racially reconciled. Because once we are able to do that, the rest of the nation will follow suit. So this is, I believe, one of the most critical mandates that we have as a nation. And I believe if we can tackle this, that is part of being socially, that's social integrity. If we can drive around and see the things that we see of injustice, poverty, if we can read the newspapers, listen to the amount of racism that's out there, and it doesn't bother us and move us into action, then we have lost our social integrity. Because when we gain our social integrity, we will see a South Africa restored and an Africa restored to what God's original blueprint is. So, thank you so much for this time. I hope I haven't run over too much. It's really been a privilege. It's really been an honor to be able to share with you. And in whatever you are doing, whatever environment you are in, I just pray that may God give you the grace, may He give you the strength for you to really understand the amazing grace that He has for you, the amazing love that He has for you, and the amazing plan that He has for you, and He's waiting for you to just jump into His arms so you can execute that plan together with Him. So thank you so much. God bless.